Okay, welcome to this lecture about APA style. I'll be talking about chapters 6 and 7 of the manual, crediting sources and constructing a reference page. First off, a bit of a review for some other stuff we've talked about in terms of when to cite a source. If you're using someone else's exact words, obviously you should cite them. And when you cite them, and you're using their exact words, you put their exact words in quotation marks, right? And then if you're using someone else's ideas, even if it's not their exact words, you still cite the source of those ideas. So you give that author, those authors, credit. And also, if you're referring to someone else's work, the previous study was done, if you're even making a statement that seems kind of general, like, research has shown. Well, if you're going to say research has shown, you need to be citing some studies that line up with what you are claiming research has shown. So you're referring to someone else's work, kind of vaguely or generally. You need to be real specific when you go to that citation and say, okay, this is what I mean when I say research has shown. Even if you're using your own words and ideas, if they've been previously published, you need to cite yourself. So it seems like, well, do I cite everything? Yeah, just about. In the introduction section of a paper, just about everything should have a citation. Almost every sentence. What doesn't have a citation? Your own opinion, which you won't use too much, but sometimes you'll use when you're saying, okay, they found this, and therefore it seems likely, right? So you're making some interpretation of research, or you're connecting two different ideas. Okay, that's your opinion. You don't have to cite yourself for, oh, here's my idea, unless you, again, published that idea previously. So when it's clearly your own opinion, you don't cite it. But you don't also say things as if they're your opinion when really they're facts. Like, oh, a healthy marriage is based on trust and open communication. Okay, that sounds very facty, right? If you say, I've always believed, okay, now it's clearly your opinion. But if it doesn't sound like an opinion, then it's not an opinion and it needs a citation. And then things that are common knowledge, right? And this can get a little gray. So I would say if you're not sure if it's common knowledge or not, but you just kind of know it to be true, and you didn't get it from a source, still go track down a source and cite it. Okay, how to cite? Excuse me. Again, you cite differently if you're using direct quotations, so the exact words, or if you're paraphrasing their words. So you read what an author wrote, and you're paraphrasing it, or you're referring to something they wrote using your own words. It's a little different. And sometimes you say, well, I changed some of the words. Am I paraphrasing or am I quoting? Well, you may be doing a mix of both. And for me, kind of the general rule I suggest following, and it's not, you won't find it in an APA manual anywhere, but it's my rule. If you have kind of 4 major words, and non-major words are things like a, and, the, right? But 4 major words in a row that are exactly the same as some author, those 4 words and whatever other words came from the author need to be in quotation marks. Right? If it's one word, probably not. Sometimes there's, saying, oh, Bowlby said about attachment. Well, Bowlby used the word attachment. You don't have to put quotations around that. Everybody uses that word. So again, if it's 4 words contiguously together, I say put quotation marks around it. If not, you're probably paraphrasing, and don't worry about the quotation marks. Excuse me. But another thing that people can do that is kind of not technically plagiarism, maybe it's kind of a gray area, but certainly lazy is the source plagiarism, right? Where you take every word in a sentence and you just get a synonym for it. You say, oh, I didn't use their words, I used my own words. No, you use the thesaurus's words. And you use their sentence structure, so you're still really plagiarizing their sentence structure. So when you go to try to paraphrase, don't go at it from a word-for-word thing. My suggestion is, write down the sentence that you're interested in citing, look at it, think about it, turn it over, walk away, do something else, come come back and say, okay, what was that sentence again, and then try to write it down, then you're more likely to put it in your own words and not verbatim what they said, and you won't be doing that kind of thesaurus plagiarism, lazy plagiarism either. Excuse me. Okay, so how do you cite when you're paraphrasing? Well, the basic information is the same for most things. You're going to cite the author or authors and the year of publication. And there's a recommendation in the current APA manual that you include the page number or paragraph number where that particular idea appeared in the work you're citing. You don't have to, and I won't really look for you to be doing that. I think it's helpful if you're, especially if you're referring to a book, right? And you know it's 1,000 pages, and you say, "Oh, yeah, this author said." When someone wants to verify that the author said that, sure, it'd be helpful to be able to direct them to a particular page number. But if it's a journal article and it's not especially long, usually it's pretty clear where you got something from, and you don't worry too much about citing page numbers, paragraphs. Again, if you're paraphrasing, if you're quoting, right? So you're putting what some of what they said or all of what they said in quotation marks, and you have the author, the year, and now you have to include either the page number or paragraph number. And you say, well, when do I do paragraph number? Well, you do paragraph number when there aren't page numbers. So non-paginated material, which is often things like websites don't have page numbers. But most journal articles and books will be paginated, and so you don't have to cite page number and paragraph number, you just cite the page number. But if you don't have page number, then you go to a paragraph number. And you have to include that information if you have a quotation, right? Because people want you want to be able to verify that people aren't misquoting a source. Excuse me. Okay. Generally, how to cite, where does information go? In terms of this author and year or author year and page number, well, it can be worked into part of the sentence, part of the narrative text, or it can go in parentheses at the end of the cited material, right? This parenthetical citation. And I encourage you to use both of these approaches, kind of mix it up. What does this look like? Well, it looks different depending on how many authors wrote the source that you're citing. When it's one author, here two different examples of including the citation material as part of this, and it's one with a quote, one without a quote. First one, you have Benjamin, parentheses 2009. So the number almost always goes in parentheses. I mean, you could say in 2009 Benjamin wrote, but you typically don't do that unless you're trying to establish something related to time. Where in 2009 you wrote this, however 2 years later you wrote this, right? So you're saying something about time and how ideas changed over time. But generally you won't do that. Generally the year will almost always be in parentheses. So author's name, Benjamin found that men tend to have more difficulty dealing with rejection than do women. Right? And you don't have to say Benjamin did a study that found. Right? Well, if you say Benjamin found it, Benjamin reported it, we know Benjamin did a study. You don't have to say did a study, conducted a study. The only time you'll ever do that is if there's something unique about that study. Say, Benjamin conducted a double-blind clinical trial examining blah blah blah. Okay, now that maybe is important because the methodology is important. You think, well, I have more faith in what you're saying because of what you're talking about the methodology. If not, you don't ever just say did a study. If you're going to talk about the study, talk about the type of study, right? And so something about the methodology. Okay. If you have a quotation, so you see the Benjamin 2009 found that, and then the quote starts, right? Male since blah blah blah. And then that quote ends, and even though that may have been the end of the sentence, you don't put a period after rejected, you just put quotes. The only time you'll have punctuation inside those quotation marks is if you have some special punctuation, question mark, exclamation point. Periods, they go outside that, because after a quote, you're going to have the page number, right? And you don't have the year with the page number. The year goes with the author, but then the page number goes at the end. Wherever the quoted material is, right after that question mark, you need to see parentheses, page, whatever it is, in parentheses, close quotation, close punctuation. Right? And you also could have seen this where an author previously reported that, and then you have the quote, and then you'd have parentheses, Benjamin, comma 2009, comma P period 247 in parentheses. Right? You could do that, but kind of weird to say an author. Why not just use the author's names? Okay, what if you have two authors? A little different. Obviously, you mentioned both of them. So here, Benjamin and Davis, 2009, found blah, blah, blah. Or if you include it, this is the second example, again, has a quote, and it also has that information all parenthetically, right? Kind of like the example we just talked about. An earlier study found that. So here you may be talking about how, oh, this study found this, and now I'm talking about some other study. So you got the author's names at the end, comma, year, comma, page number. And notice the one of the differences between the two. In the top one, Benjamin and Davis, the and is A and D. And the bottom one, Benjamin and Davis, it's an ampersand. Right? So whenever the and is outside of parentheses in the text, it's and. Whenever it's inside parentheses, it's an ampersand. Right? That's your rule to follow. Okay, what if you have more than two authors? Okay, and let me back up for a second here and say, if you have one author, if you have two authors, the first time you cite it, the second time you cite it, the third time you cite it, always the same. When you have more than two authors, the rules change. For the first time you cite something, the first time you mention it in your paper, if you mention that article again, you cite it again, it may change how you're citing it. So if you have more than two authors, the first time you cite it, all the authors, right? So Benjamin, Davis, and Garcia, 2009, found, blah, blah, I've got a quote, so quotation marks, page number at the end after the quote, directly after the quote. Or if I want to put all the authors inside the parentheses together at the end, Benjamin, Davis, and Garcia. And again, notice whenever the and is inside parentheses, it is an ampersand. And there is a comma preceding that ampersand, which you don't have in the text when it's two authors, which we'll see later. It's for some odd reason is different in the reference page. Sorry. Okay. Citing more than two authors, subsequent citations, again I told you it changes. So the next time you cite it, so here we've got the first time Benjamin, Davis, and Garcia found, blah, blah, blah. And then if in that same paragraph, or even anywhere else in the paper, I'm going to cite that same exact source again. Now I say Benjamin et al. 2009, right? And the et al. Means and the rest, Latin abbreviation, so you don't have to write all the authors' names. And it's et space al period space parentheses. Right? Not italicized or anything funky. Excuse me. Here's how it looks. Another example, if Benjamin, Davis, and Garcia had been cited parenthetically the first time, so Benjamin, Davis, ampersand, Garcia. The next time, again, it's still the same, Benjamin et al. 2009. But then, once I've said, an author's name not in the parentheses, so here, Benjamin et al., the second time it appears, the first time et al. Appears, the second time Benjamin appears in the second one, it's not in parentheses, right? After it's not appeared in parentheses once, the next time you say it in that same paragraph, you don't have to use the year. So if I'd kept going, Benjamin et al. 2009, blah, 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 and then Benjamin et al. Again, now I don't have to cite the year. I don't have to say 2009. And it can be tricky to remember that, I think, and to keep, did I use the year, not the year? So I would say, just always cite the year. You're not going to be wrong for citing the year repeatedly in a paragraph. It's just that you don't necessarily have to within the same paragraph. New paragraph, put the year again the first time. But again, if you want to save the confusion, just always cite the year, and you're going to be easier. But definitely the first time that it appears outside of parentheses, you have to have the year. And whenever it appears inside parentheses, it always has to have the year. Remember, if it's the first time, second time, third time, same paragraph, doesn't matter. Okay. Now, a little exception, right? Because we talked about if you have more than two authors, you cite them all the first time, right? Yeah, well, you cite them all the first time as long as there's 3, 4, or 5. If you have more than 5 authors, now the rules change. You cite the first author only the first time, and also subsequent times. So if your authors are Benjamin, Davis, Garcia, Lee, Cartier, and Smith, the first time you cited them, it would be Benjamin et al. Right? So a little different than if you have fewer authors. Excuse me. So sometimes you do have to go back and count. How many were there? Exactly 5. Got to cite them all the first time. If there's 6, okay, now you only have to cite the first one, even the first time. If this seems confusing, look at table 6.1 in the manual. I mean, obviously read all of the manual, but look at table 6.1. It really does a good job of summarizing. Okay, if you have this many authors, or this many, or this many, the first time you cite it's like this, the second time it's like this. So it's a really helpful in one spot summary of all the stuff I've just been rambling on about. Okay, how to cite if more than one source is cited in the same sentence, which again I encourage you to do in terms of integrating sources where you're going to say research has shown. Don't just cite one study, cite a couple studies when you're saying research has shown. Whenever you do that, you say, well, which source goes first? Well, you put them in order alphabetically, and you separate them using semicolons. So if more than one study had shown that men tend to have difficulty dealing with rejection, then you would cite, whatever studies you wanted. Benjamin 2009, semicolon, Davis 2010. So reading that, I know, okay, both of these studies, both of these authors published papers at different points in time showing the same effect. Okay, what about secondary sources? So here you have, Benjamin 2009 contends that men have difficulty dealing with rejection, as cited in Davis 2010. What this means is you didn't read Benjamin 2009, right? So you're reading Davis 2010 and you're like, oh, this Benjamin 2009 said a really cool thing. I want to cite that. But I'm too lazy to go find that article myself. I'll just cite it as a secondary citation, secondary source. What you can do, I encourage you not to do very often. Actually, I would encourage you not to do it at all. But if you are going to do it, and sometimes you can't maybe locate that original source, you can't locate Benjamin 2009, and when that happens, okay, now you have to cite it this way. So you put as cited in Davis 2010, and the Davis 2010 is what will show up in your reference page. Benjamin 2009 will not, because you didn't actually read it. The one you read was the Davis, so that's one that goes in your reference page. Excuse me. Again, encourage you to try not to do that. If you find somebody citing somebody else, go find that somebody else, read their paper, and then you can cite it as a primary source, not a secondary source. Okay. How to cite if the source is a website. Generally, you want to be sure and provide, just like you would a journal article, chapter, anything else, the author and the year they wrote it. Sometimes there's not a clear author. Whenever certain things on the web, if they're written anonymously or they're written by some organization, we just don't know who wrote it, then you cite the first few words of the title of the piece and you put those in quotes. So, the thing we've been citing, and some website where the beginning was how people face dealing with rejection. We'd say how people face, in quotes, comma, the year it was published. Sometimes there's no year. We don't know when it was published. It's been on the web since time immemorial. Well, at least last year. If there's no year, then you put ND for no date in place of the year. Right. So here we have the author. So Benjamin, comma ND. And again, if you have neither the author nor the year, then you would have that how people face, comma ND. And again, I would encourage you to be cautious about citing sources where you don't know the author and you don't know the publication date. You probably shouldn't be citing too many things like that in any kind of empirical paper, because you really don't know much about the integrity of the source, and it's going to be hard to track down, is this true, if you don't know who wrote it or when they wrote it. Right? So limit your use of those, most definitely. Okay, other things you might want to read up on. We don't have time to cover everything in the manual, even everything in these chapters. Sometimes you have multiple works by the same author, and if it's Fiala, Bookert, and Hutka, Fiala, Hucka, and Bookert. Okay, that's not a big deal because those are two different orders of authors' names. It's clear one is different. But if you have Fiala 2005, Fiala 2009, what do you do? If you have Fiala 2005 and another Fiala 2005, what do you do? How do you distinguish between those? The manual will be glad to tell you. What about when you have a group as author? As if when you're citing the DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Illness, the American Psychiatric Association is the author, not the American Psychological Association. Important distinction. The manual will be glad to tell you how to cite that. What about when you want to make alterations to quoted materials? Right? You want to use part of a quote, you want to fit it into your sentence, but maybe you need to change the capitalization of a letter, or omit a word, or change some punctuation. The manual tells you what you can do without comment, and then whenever you go too far, how you have to let the reader know, oh yeah, I changed this quote a bit. Citations within quoted materials. So you're quoting somebody who quoted somebody else. It'll be glad to tell you how to do that. If you're citing classical works, the Bible, the Quran, tends to be different than other books. Right? They're kind of special. And there's a special section on how to cite classical works. Okay, on to constructing the reference page at the end of your paper. The word references goes at the top of a new page, right? So whenever you finish the discussion section, you enter a page break, right? Don't just space down, I hate that. Enter a page break, the next new page, references should be centered and bolded at the top of the page, right? Not works cited, not reference list, references. That everything on that page should be double spaced, and don't type space, type space. Just set the page to be double spaced and type away. And you don't type a citation and then space twice before typing the next one. Now you're going to be quadruple spaced. Just set your page to double space, type away. The citations, obviously, they go in order alphabetically by last name of the first author. There should be 100% correspondence with what's on your reference page and what's in the text. What I mean by this is everything in your reference page, everything you're saying, oh, I referenced all these things, they're not things that you just read and thought about when writing a paper. They're things that you cited, right? So there shouldn't be anything in your reference page that doesn't have a citation somewhere in the text. And vice versa. If you have a citation in the text, it dang sure better be a reference for it on your reference page. If you don't, then that's a problem. So 100% correspondence, those should match. You create a hanging indent for each citation, and again, figure out how to use Word to do this appropriately. Because if you try to type it in a line, hit return, and space over, you're going to end up getting funky formatting things. Just learn how to set a hanging indent. If you're not sure, I'd be glad to talk with you about that. If you have more than one source from the same author, I already kind of told you to look this up, but generally in the reference page list, the oldest comes first, so they go in order alphabetically first, and then if they're alphabetically identical, then it's chronologically. The order of author names, within a citation, usually this is pretty clear, right? If you're looking at a paper, and the first author is the one on the left, and the last one is the furthest to the right, so they go in order from left to right. Sometimes journals do funky things where you have these kind of two columns of authors and then one in the middle. So again, generally you go top to bottom, left to right. So the leftmost, topmost name is the first author, and the bottommost, rightmost author is the last. And it goes in that order, again, top to bottom, then left to right. Okay, in terms of the DOI and URL, the DOI is a digital object identifier, and you need to include it for all articles that you find in electronic journals. So if you're reading some journal online, there should be a DOI associated with the particular article you're looking at. And then articles from paper-based journals that are in electronic form. So if you're reading the PDF version you downloaded online, you have to include the DOI for that. Well, what if you are kind of a dinosaur and have a paper-based article, right? So you actually have a journal that you went to the library and then read it, right? Or maybe you're at your local psychologist's office visiting, and you pick up your thumbing through a journal and go, "Ooh, this is a good article. I think I'll cite it." Technically, you aren't required to include a DOI for that article, but that article more than likely has a DOI. You could, even though you didn't find it digitally, you could probably go online to a database and figure out what the DOI is. And I would say best practice is to go ahead and do that for all articles, just so everything is the same, right? Kind of excuse me, be standardized. So I would say always include a DOI when there is one, and there always will be one if it's any kind of academic journal that's electronic journal online or the electronic form of a paper academic journal. What about the URL, right? So that's that www dot whatever. You don't need it if you have the DOI, right? So even though you may be reading some article online and it has a hyperlink that goes to it, you don't have to include that URL. All you have to include is the DOI. So don't do both. Mostly when you do need to include a URL is if you're citing something from a non-empirical article. And this is often Time Magazine Online, or please don't cite them, but Wikipedia. If you're citing something like that, you definitely would need to put the URL where you found that at the time you found it. The thing about URLs and even DOIs, they often can be quite long. Sometimes because there's no space in there, it'll cause the text won't wrap. It'll bump a whole line down, right? So you can break a URL, a long one, or even a DOI, but you do it before some punctuation mark in the address in the URL or the DOI. Example here, you have the Sesame Street and I broke it there at content, right? So there's content /56. So right before the slash, I hit return to send that next part down to the next line. Okay, now a few examples of some of the things you'll cite most commonly, and this isn't everything you'd cite. The manual does have an example for pretty much every type of source you could think of citing, but some of the most common ones will be things like journal articles. Probably 90% of what you're citing will be journal articles, and obviously this should be double spaced. It's just not double spaced here for space sake. So you have the last name, comma, space, first initial, period, space, middle initial, period, comma, space, on through the other names, right? And if they only have one initial, fine, only put one initial. But if they have two, put them both. Notice use an ampersand here for and. Never A and D in the reference page, always ampersand, at least where the author's names are, separating author's names. Always, always, always ampersand. The year goes after the authors, and then the title of the journal article, which only the first word has the first letter capitalized, the rest of the title of the article not capitalized, and not italics, just plain text, period, and then the name of the journal, which is italicized, so American Journal of Kick-Ass Stuff, volume 8, and the 8, the volume number, is italicized. And then if you have an issue number, it goes in parentheses immediately following the volume number, no space. So issue number 2, and the issue number is not italicized. Why is volume italicized and issues not? I have no idea. That's the way it is. And then a comma, and then the page range of where the article appears. Pages 211 to 232, period, and then that digital object identifier. And if it weren't an empirical article, then that's where your URL would go. Found at whatever. And you don't have to. And I've seen some people doing things where found using PsycInfo. No, you don't have to do that. The DOI is sufficient. You don't have to say which database it was. Those DOIs are unique. That's what they're made to be. Okay. A book chapter in an edited book, another thing you might cite. So again, pretty similar, authors' names. And notice how you have just two authors, so you separate with an ampersand. But unlike other kind of American grammatical rules, usually if you have this and that, and it's not two independent clauses, you don't have a comma. But here you do, so the name, comma, ampersand, the next name. The title of the chapter, which is analogous here to the title of the excuse me, journal article. So just the first letter capitalized, not italicized, and then if it's an edited book, in first initial, period, last name, ed if it's editors, eds, comma, and the name of the book, which is italicized, Essays on Mystical Phenomenon. And here, instead of just putting the page numbers, like a journal article, it's just 211 to 232. Here it's pp for pages 25 through 43. Last, website, and in particular a website that lists a government report. Here's an example where you have the from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and then of that, the division is the National Institutes of Health. The year it was published, the name of the report, right, which is ADHD, the NIH publication number, which you won't always have, but if you have it, you include it, and then that URL where you say retrieved from yada yada, and you notice that's broken at punctuation marks. Okay, summing up. Use the manual as a resource. Don't try to memorize it. There's no point. It is a resource. It's like a dictionary. You go back, oh, how do I cite that? Let me look it up. Like, oh yeah, well, if I have two citations where the authors have the same name, what do? Look it up. Keep it beside you when writing your paper, especially when writing your reference page. Don't trust any website or database to cite correctly for you. I know, like in PsycInfo and other EBSCO databases, you can click a button and say cite, and it has, oh, do you want AMA, APA, MLA? Oh, I'll do APA. Sometimes they're wrong, right? And the reason they're wrong is, well, sometimes they screwed up, but sometimes whenever that citation was created in that database, it was created under maybe an earlier publication manual, and they didn't update it when the newer manual came out. But you're responsible for what's in the newer manual, so that may be a good starting point to kind of cut and paste that, but always go back and make sure it's formatted correctly and everything is as it should be. Last, make sure that your reference page and your in-text citations match. Again, that 100% correspondence. That is a very big deal in terms of academic honesty and clarity. It needs to be clear where your things are coming from, and that you're accurately representing the works that you have cited. Okay. That's all for now. Take care.